Mass Effect. Quite possibly the greatest game series ever. It had everything. Passion, originality, depth. I could go on. I'm about to go on. But if you can't be asked to sit here for 40 minutes or however long I decide to ramble for, listening to me going on about some really, really great games, talking a little about what makes games themselves so engaging, and looking at the very future of games themselves through the past, you could listen to the next 15 seconds and leave. I think Mass Effect's a good game. PC Gamer agrees Mass Effect's a good game. I don't agree with PC Gamer agreeing. Games are cool and hopefully will get cooler, and Mass Effect is a good example of what other games can hope to become. Okay, that's it. Have fun, comment, rate, subscribe, share on your Facebook, MySpace, Peace, etc. Okay, so you're still here. That's good. I'll assume that you're interested in at least some of what I have to say. Let's start with what prompted me to make this video. PC Gamer. They wrote an article with this title, link in the description. I thought, that's a bold claim, PC Gamer, and checked out the article, and to my surprise, I agreed with what they had to say. They ranked the game in the same order as I did. Mass Effect 2 at the top, Mass Effect 3 in the middle, and Mass Effect itself third. A game journalist actually did something I agreed with, and I didn't want to insult it. And then I properly read the article, and then I got the pitchfork out. Let's see what's wrong with it, shall we? James Davenport of PC Gamer begins by saying that the ranking focuses on storytelling and characterization, and not on gameplay and combat. Scrolling down, let's have a look at what they have to say about Mass Effect 1. The combat is bad, the Mako is bad, maths is bad. Welcome to game journalism. Their laud for Mass Effect boils down to the fact that it sets up for Mass Effect 2 and 3 really well. I disagree with all of these points. Mass Effect, even though it is not my favourite Mass Effect game, is an absolutely amazing game. It does a lot more than lay groundwork. It did something no other game has done to the same extent bar one. It made me care. It made me feel joy. It made me feel regret. It made me feel. The ending itself was so resolute, and as we all know, taking a satisfying ending for granted is not something one can do with the Mass Effect series. Before moving on to what I actually think of Mass Effect, thank you, PC Gamer, for demonstrating the hypocrisy that exists in game journalism so quickly. In fewer than 100 words, they say they won't be focusing on combat, and then absolutely ream Mass Effect 1 for exactly that. But their criticisms are this: clunky combat, inconsistent pacing, and empty exploration. Combat is a product of its time, and as a result of old-fashioned RPG mentality. They say you can miss because maths. And that's because of your character skill, not your skill. If you've ever played tabletop role-playing games, you'll be familiar with this, or some old-fashioned games like the Infinity Engine stuff, Baldur's Gate, and that sort of thing. Even some different games like Morrowind, or The Witcher. Hang on a moment, this isn't old-fashioned at all. It's normality. It wasn't meant to be a shooter, it's meant to be an RPG with shooter elements, like Fallout. No, not that Fallout, the other Fallout. Yeah, that one, that's better. And in my book, that's absolutely fine. It was tolerable at worst, definitely not bad, and certainly not clunky. If you want clunky combat, try Morrowind. The Mako wasn't great, admittedly, but is it really bad enough to say Mass Effect 1 was a bad game? It was a little annoying at best, and after getting used to it, it wasn't bad at all. Much like the combat itself, it just required a little practice. The inconsistent pacing, in my opinion, is a boon, not a flaw. If it were all paced the same, it would be fast or slow throughout the whole thing, and that would be boring. I loved the excitement and speed of the missions, and then coming back to the calm and tranquility of the Normandy. That change in pacing seemed completely intentional and fine. The empty exploration isn't something I can comment a whole lot about, I haven't done much of it. However, I still managed to get 30 hours out of one playthrough. By no means is it essential. Yet there are still interesting bits, for example a Prothean artifact that is the use for the trinket the consort gives you on the Citadel. To say it's all empty may be true, but it's not a huge part of the game, and certainly not time consuming. It's very brief periods of non-essential emptiness. So, with that, enough of what James Davenport didn't like about the game. What did I not like about the game? It certainly stuck to the BioWare formula, and was all the more predictable as a result. I felt Feros and Noveria were unnecessarily long, especially for the payoff, and were filled with enemies for no good reason. It tried to be a traditional, fun game, and this is something all three Mass Effect games are guilty of, the consequent ones even more so. In fact, every BioWare game, Dragon Age, all of the Dragon Age series really do suffer from this, and it's noticeable. Yeah, it's not why we play these games, it's not the combat, it's the dialogue as well as the combat, and we could have done with less of the latter, though that's just my opinion. I have nothing to say about the graphics. It was 2007, I've seen worse, and I played the first game with the MEUITM mod, and it looked absolutely fine for me. In fact, really nice. Some of the MEUITM textures are better than 2 and 3. I highly recommend it. I do, however, have something to say about the characters. They don't really react to what you do beyond the brief comm room conversation. In Mass Effect 2 and 3, they react to your choices far better, especially after the loyalty missions. This is something I did feel put Mass Effect 1 behind 2 and a little behind 3. I feel like it almost set up for it. After the first mission on Eden Prime, you can ask Ashley or Kaidan how they feel about what happened, and they respond. I wish there were more moments like this, where you can talk to people about what just happened, though they're more willing to talk about their own lives. Right, so moving on to what I liked. The world building. It was fantastic. It delivers it to you in small bite-sized chunks, without overwhelming you with complex histories of the galaxy. It also helps that you can pick a dialogue option and Shepard will say something, expanding on what you know. I really wanted to ask everyone everything I could about the world and their lives, and looked forward to finding out more about my crew and squad mates in every upcoming conversation. It wasn't the missions I looked forward to, but the talking. All this, however, was more than simply laying the groundwork for the following games. Consider this diagram. No, the colour choice was not unintentional. Mass Effect 1 is the only game in the Mass Effect trilogy that starts telling a story as well as finishes it. This itself proves that it does a lot more than set up for Mass Effect 2 and 3. Unlike Mass Effect 2, which only really sets up 3. Mass Effect 1 involves you in the world and connects you with it. There are some really powerful moments where you feel that you're engaged with what's happening around you. The most powerful moment in the game, for me, was quite odd. It was this.
Oh, hello, Shepard.
Are you okay?
I don't know. Your ship is amazing, and your crew's been really great to me, especially your chief engineer. But I just sort of feel out of place. The Normandy runs so smooth it feels like we're not even moving, and the engines are so quiet. How do you sleep at night?
The silence wakes you up?
Back on the flotilla, the last thing you want to hear is silence. It means an engine's died or an air filter shut down. I guess you don't have to worry about that here. But old habits die hard.
That moment was when I realised I really cared for each of these characters. I wanted everyone to grab a pot and a pan and bang them, or whatever they want to do to make some noise so that Tali could get some sleep. I then thought about why I cared about all of these characters. None of them are really comfortable with where they stand about themselves, yet they all want to help me, whether it's to follow their principles or simple military duty. But they all put faith in themselves, and more importantly, faith in Shepard to succeed. The realization that there are people relying on you when they clearly have other things that they could be doing and worrying about is a hugely rewarding and reassuring feeling. And that's what Mass Effect 1 was for me. It was the emotional impact, meeting and getting to know these people. It's the emotional impact that had on me, and that's what mattered. And what's more, I didn't even realize. It did it so elegantly and so naturally. I didn't even notice that I was really getting close to these people until that relationship was threatened in some way. In this case, it was Tali being uncomfortable on my ship, and that questions how much Shepard is looking out for the crew. The other moment when a relationship is threatened is, of course, Virmire, my favourite part of the game. This is easily the choice Mass Effect players are most polarised by. They care so much for these characters, they will argue about it on the internet with strangers. It's a perfect demonstration of the way you start caring without realising, and only realise when that relationship is brought into question. It comes down to which relationship you're willing to let go. The one you didn't want to be questioned. I liked both Kaidan and Ashley, but let Ashley and Kirrahe die. I couldn't think of a more fitting end for Ashley, restoring honour to her family name. I also hear her writing's pretty rubbish in Mass Effect 3, so double whammy. Anyway, that choice was not only important because it dictated which characters showed up in Mass Effect 2 and 3, but because it forced you to decide between two things you probably cared about, and you probably didn't want to. But we all made that choice, and a lot of us were affected by it emotionally. We cared about what happened. No matter whom you chose, the survivor in the comm room following the mission expresses regret at Shepard's choice, wishing it was them. That regret often carries on to the player. The way Mass Effect made the player feel about their own choices and dialogue is second to none. A great illustration of this is Saren. Even James Davenport agrees that he was the best villain because he was sympathetic. He made you think about what you had done, all the lengths you had gone to in order to stop him, and there you are, almost agreeing with him. This is where Mass Effect shone, making you feel things without necessarily making you realise. So, to conclude the first part of the video, Mass Effect 1 did a lot more than lay the groundwork for Mass Effect 2 and 3, but in fact involved us in a way unparalleled by almost any other game, emotionally. It made us care and gave us a reason to. So, moving on to Mass Effect 2. My favourite game of all time. Mass Effect 2's intro itself sets the tone for the rest of the game so brilliantly. Remember everything you cared about and loved? It literally goes up in flames right from the get-go. What made this game so brilliant is that it challenged not only you, but it challenged Shepard. What's more, it challenged both you and Shepard's morals. It forces you to do more than you are willing to, but the brilliance of it is that it allows you to show that unwillingness throughout. I'll tell you more about the biggest reason I like Mass Effect 2 later in the overview, because I think it's something that all three Mass Effect games do so brilliantly, but Mass Effect 2 the best out of the three. What James Davenport has to say about it though, is that it's the best in the series because it builds meaningful relationships and then puts them at great risk, though he does compare it to a visual novel which did rub me the wrong way a little. I know that Mass Effect 2 wasn't perfect though. It was definitely hampered by a weak and somewhat railroady plot, though it becomes easier to digest as time goes on. It could really have done with a better plot, though I hasten to add, it did not need more of a focus thereupon. The mission on the derelict Reaper was fantastic in my eyes, as it brought the elusive man's willingness to play you like a fiddle into light, as well as highlighting your fortitude in walking both in and out of a trap with only your trust in the elusive man damaged. I did also miss the skill system. I felt like it was moving towards more of a shooter feel for no real reason, most visible in the fact that a lot of the levels are simply glorified shooting ranges with scores of enemies to gun down and not a whole lot else. This criticism of course does carry over to Mass Effect 3. But one defense for this move is that if your Shepard learned the skills in Mass Effect 1, he wouldn't need to start, or she, sorry, would not need to start learning those skills again in Mass Effect 2. So, moving on, the ending was, as such, amazing, though I did feel that the idea of a human Reaper was out of place. There's no reason for the Reapers to build a human Reaper, much less model it after a human. I thought that it would have done better just omitted, which is kind of what Mass Effect 3 treats it as. The idea of it was brilliantly gritty sci-fi. The execution felt much more like a video game boss and not gritty sci-fi at all. It wasn't scary, not like Sovereign, or even This Hurts You, Harbinger, but comic and childish. Certainly an underwhelming end to an extraordinary game. What Davenport said makes Mass Effect 2 better than 1 and 3 is the relationship building. And I thought this is what made Mass Effect 2 brilliant as well. It is the Star Wars Episode 5 of the Mass Effect series. Mass Effect 2 was inspired by The Empire Strikes Back, without a doubt. The developers say so themselves.
One of the key themes for Mass Effect 2 is this whole concept of darkness.
It's almost like The Empire Strikes Back of the Mass Effect trilogy. It's a dark second chapter.
It's moody. It's like that dark space you kind of keep secret that we're scratching at that you're going to go to in this game.
Star Wars Episode 5 was important, and people loved it because it took time off the main plot to get to know characters and developed them individually rather than rushing to get to the next plot point. It was darker in tone and larger in scope. The ending was far less resolute, and though there was still a sense of accomplishment, it still managed to leave something to be desired, some yearning for the next one. It really hit the right spots. It set up Episode 6, and as well as telling a good story of its own, much like Mass Effect 2. And again, much like Mass Effect 2, it quickly became the fan favourite. Mass Effect 2 was noticeably darker than Mass Effect 1, set in places like Omega, designed to be the opposite of the Citadel, and also my favourite place in any video game ever. It really showed the characters changing. To expand on what I was saying earlier, I'd like to give the example of Horizon. You go there and meet the person you saved on Virmire, who was possibly your love interest as well, and they tell you to piss off. This game was not a game to make you happy. This game was a game to tell a story. It really told its story, and the one it wanted to tell. The odds are against you, and the people you want to help you don't want to help you. But this time, the odds against you are entirely personal. They aren't against the ideal you were fighting for, but the people didn't want to help you, Commander Shepard. Mass Effect 2 introduced 10 squad members, only 2 of which were old hands. Each character was brilliant, bar one, who was dreadfully boring. Everyone was distinctive and bursting with character, bar one, who was dreadfully boring. Everyone had an interesting dilemma. Everyone had a good choice at the end of that dilemma, bar one, who was dreadfully boring. The loyalty missions were what I loved about Mass Effect 2. They developed the characters and their relationship with Shepard individually. The dark undertone here is that these missions are their last wishes. And it's up to you to grant them. The plot may be weak, but the story certainly wasn't. Shepard's story is developed hugely, and how he or she met all these people and helped them or not really decides their fate in the suicide mission, as well as your choices during that. So that's what made Mass Effect 2 great, that it allowed you to tell the story in sections through the characters being developed, rather than just the main quest with side quests. The side quests themselves were a part of that story. The suicide mission is something the game prepares you for from the very beginning. It's the very premise, the very reason for you to round up this ragtag bunch of not heroes to save the galaxy once more. And I loved the feeling of having a goal, something to work towards, and having to collect my A-team for it. I love the way each quest is about that character, not about you. In a lot of other games, the player ends up having to do everything. All the choices are down to them. But in the loyalty missions, the companions aren't helping you, you're helping them. And I owe you for the suicide mission. Something that demonstrates the very brilliance of what it is to be a video game to the core. It takes into account previous choices, as well as providing an exciting and engaging experience for the player, culminating in a brilliant series of endings moulded to your personal choices. Each and every one of the characters, bar one, is developed really well, and more importantly, you can see the effect of your choices on them. How you choose to deal with Miranda's sister does affect her, and I love to see that. I also love the way people talked about the mission, both Joker and Kelly Chambers, both of whom I absolutely adored as crewmates. Kelly and Joker really make your choices feel that much more real, because they react to them. Arguably, a choice is as important as its consequence, and the fact that they gave it a consequence makes your choice that much more important and that much more believable. They spoke to you not only about the choice you made, but their opinion on it too. I also loved the introduction of the interrupts. The way that you can reach into a cutscene and mess around with it was both fantastic and original, and I loved the way it was these little things that really made a difference to the story being told. In the other two games, majority of the story being told was BioWare's job, not yours. In Mass Effect 2, it really becomes up to you to do or not to do things.
If you shoot me, my team.
How about goodbye?
Mass Effect 2 really adds to the world Mass Effect 1 built, showing you the seedier side of the galaxy, and I thought it was very much representational of Shepard being forced into a place they don't want to be in a both physical and metaphysical way. Each of the choices was fairly morally ambiguous, and really let you develop your Shepard in a way the other games didn't. The Renegade option was as tempting as the Paragon at times. In Mass Effect 1, I was Paragon for most of it, almost without realising, though I did notice I got annoyed with politicians a lot and tended to go Renegade there. I did let the Council die too, though I said focus on Sovereign. By the end of Mass Effect 2, my Shepard was even parts Renegade as Paragon. None of the choices were easy to make, unlike Mass Effect 1. It showed us the Batarians, who were in Bring Down the Sky, and the Vorcha, as well as the Protheans, or rather, the Collectors. It also developed organisations such as Cerberus, and showed us the effect of a few choices we made in Mass Effect. The world itself was brilliantly believable, something all the Mass Effect games excel at, and I do willingly concede that Mass Effect 2 would not have been as great a game as it was for me had I not played Mass Effect 1 first. It worked well not only because it introduced, but it expanded as well. Mass Effect 2 was a game in the best sense. It was fun, it was funny, it was engaging, it was immersive, and most importantly, it granted the player agency. It wasn't just Paragon or Renegade anymore, it was deeper than that. You still decided what to say and what to do, and you still formed your own opinions and you got to act on those opinions. A great example of this is with Kelly Chambers. This moment here.
I trust you implicitly. The moment I met you, I knew I could close my eyes, fall back, and you'd be there.
Your trust is well placed, Kelly.
I knew it would be. Thank you, Shepard. Anything else you'd like to talk about?
These three choices really let you make up your own mind about Kelly. Would you drop her? Would you simply catch her and make sure she stays on her feet? Or would you embrace her? Mass Effect 2 took the Shepard you were playing and made it matter. They allowed you to really decide on the little things about your Shepard's character and use them in dialogue or in actions. And it made that really important for the player to think about. Mass Effect 1 and 3 told the same story regardless of what you do, but Mass Effect 2 didn't. Mass Effect 2 made you, and you specifically, important. Mass Effect 2 gave me an interesting world to look at, as well as a plot that was engaging enough to get me interested, a reason to care, and characters to love. I really don't know what else to ask for. Finally, Mass Effect 3. A lot of people love to drop hate on this game. I'm not one of those people. And for the most part, I really enjoyed this game. I loved the conclusion it gave to the game, and the end itself was fantastic. What? The ending? No, that's wrong. You hate the ending. Everyone hates the ending. No, not the ending. The end. The last part. The fight through London. The bit in the Presidium. That bit. Not the Angel Kid. Anyway, I'll get back to that. James Davenport's criticisms lie here. It fixates too much on the themes and not enough on the characters. I thought the Angel Thing kid was certainly ham-fisted, really pretentious, and obviously very shoehorned. I concede this point. But I believe Mass Effect 3 has a lot of good, contrary to popular belief. Unfortunately, with the good comes the bad as well as the ugly. The characterization and gameplay is the good. The ending is the bad, and the ugly is easily identifiable because it has a name and a face. Frickin Lange. Mass Effect 3's big problem is not focusing too much on the themes, it's introducing things too quickly. The Reapers are thrown in your face at the beginning, Kai Lang is needlessly shoehorned, and Cerberus is weirdly reintroduced as a villain, though in Mass Effect 2 it's clearly established that they're morally grey, and the Catalyst jammed into the pretentious ending for the sake of meaning. It's rushed. Do you remember my amazing diagram from part 1? Yeah, that's the overall story. So, it's pretty far in. It's the last third or so. Way too far in to be introducing major plot points so abruptly with no previous setup in previous games, much less ones that change opinions formed in Mass Effect 2. There's no good reason for it, and that's what I was annoyed about. It makes the Reapers less terrifying. In Mass Effect 1, to take down one Reaper, Sovereign, it was next to impossible. It took half the Citadel fleet. Yet in Mass Effect 3, Shepard and the Normandy take one down by themselves, or just one single Thresher more on Tuchanka. Mass Effect 3 shoves a lot down your throat, and really quickly. The auto-dialogue and removal of a neutral option really force you into areas you don't want to be in, irritatingly. And there are a few things I feel obliged to talk about before moving on to what I liked, and they're really important to my overall opinion on Mass Effect 3. They are the ending, Cerberus, and Frickin Lange. Cerberus changed so much from Mass Effect 2 to Mass Effect 3, though it has a reason: indoctrination. This is not something I'd have a huge problem with, as indoctrination is something that was introduced from the beginning and therefore not a Deus Ex Machina, though I did feel like it threw away everything Mass Effect 2 established, which made it all the more visceral. I did feel that Cerberus became generic villains and not vessels of Reaper vindication. They aren't represented as that. They're represented as completely amoral, vengeful, evil people killing innocents for no reason. Take Kelly Chambers, for example. She has 3 possible endings. She throws away everything she cared about and changes her identity, or she kills herself out of guilt from selling Shepard out unintentionally, and she is shot by Cerberus. Cerberus has no real reason to go out and track down the ex-yeoman of the Normandy SR2, yet they do, and they kill her. No important reason at all. So, if or when it happens, it just feels like an excuse to get you to dislike Cerberus, because they're evil now. This brings me to Frickin Lange, who kills everyone you love for no real reason, and guess what? He's a Cerberus agent. This is obviously a cheap grab to get us to hate Cerberus. He kills Thane, and or Miranda, and or Kirahi, and or the Solarian Counselor, and I'll be damned if I don't avenge Miri. So, what was the problem with Kai Lange, if not just the whole simple reason to say, I hate Cerberus? He was shoehorned, simply introduced to annoy you, and had no character aside from that. He exists simply to foil Shepard's plans to settle down and want a normal life with the woman he loved. He doesn't even fit the theme of Mass Effect. We know what a space assassin looked like. Thane, or Kolyat. That's what a space assassin is in Mass Effect. They aren't Kai Lange, and Kai Lange is in no way like them. He has next to no development, and he's an out-of-place ninja in a place he should never have been in the first instance. One thing I always loved about Mass Effect was how I could form my own opinions about the characters. Not everyone liked Garrus from the beginning, but I did, and I didn't like Jackal that much, yet I hear she's a bit of a fan favourite. So when BioWare tries to make me feel what they want about a character or a group, it's noticeable and it's irritating. Now, the ending. I promised I'd come back to this. I played it with the extended cut DLC, as well as a mod that restores a conversation with Anderson. And I didn't think it was too bad. The ending itself was not great, but it wasn't terrible either. It wasn't so bad it made me hate all of Mass Effect 3, but it did annoy me as a player, because it felt retrofitted and noticeably pretentious. It didn't match the feeling of the game. There's no resolute ending, which I don't mind in and of itself, but I do mind the way that Shepard is needlessly killed off, as well as Anderson in a way. There are so many better ways to do it. It could have been almost anything. It could have been good. There are better videos about this very subject, but essentially, it added too much last minute, making it a huge Deus Ex Machina. It drew on nothing done, nor nothing learnt in the last 80 hours of gameplay, disconnecting it entirely from the rest of the game and making it feel as natural as Battersea Power Plant. However, the part leading up to the ending was one of the most emotionally and visually stunning moments in video game history. I loved every second of that. Lest we forget, Marauder Shields. His sacrifice will be forever remembered. So, moving on to what I liked. James Davenport said that Mass Effect 3 doesn't focus on character. This irks me. Davenport says that the Citadel Dlc is perhaps the best DLC add-on in the entire series, and I will admit he's a man after my own heart when he says this. I loved that DLC. In fact, I think it's the best DLC for anything. It may be unashamed fan pandering, but as a fan, I'm not going to complain about people, especially developers of my favourite games, pandering to me. That DLC itself shows how Mass Effect 3 handles characters. They're there with you through thick and thin, and something Davenport says is how the character arcs tie up. What is my favourite moment in Mass Effect 3, much like many others, is shooting the bottle with Garrus. So, cast your mind back to Mass Effect 1. Upon meeting Garrus, he's trying to do the right thing, but he can't because of C-Sec and their red tape, and that's a struggle he faces throughout the game. But then, as time progresses, he also tells you that he was under consideration for becoming a Spectre, but he was too unconfident, and amongst other things, he chose not to really carry through with that. When you meet him in Mass Effect 2, he's a completely different person. He's confident, he's out there, he's doing what he thinks is right, no matter the cost, yet he's still harbouring deep regrets concerning Sidonis, and has some sort of obsession with calibrations. But then, as you meet him in Mass Effect 3, what he does is take you up to the Presidium and throws bottles off and you shoot them together. Now, what does this show us? It shows us that Garrus is now a rule breaker. He's a free bird. He does what he wants. He's changed completely, and he's willing to bend the rules if it comes to that. And this isn't just about having a bit of fun and throwing bottles off. It carries through to everything. He's almost a spectre of his own. He does what he wants. And this is the change that's shown to us in Mass Effect 3. It's not obvious, and it's not just through conversations or something, but rather it's the epitome of good storytelling. Show, not tell. Garrus, Liara, and Tali, as well as the Virmire survivor, all change so much. It's incredible, and you can really see who they've become. Garrus starts as this really awkward, insecure guy, really unsure of himself, wanting to break the rules, but also not wanting to break the rules. But then by Mass Effect 3, he becomes completely self-confident and really understands his place with the whole thing. He's willing to do what he wants, and he gets who he is, and that's thanks to you. That character arc is handled so brilliantly. So, that's why I think to say that you don't spend much time on characterization in Mass Effect 3 isn't really true. It's certainly enough time, and this goes for all the characters. Tuchanka with Mordin is easily one of the most memorable moments and isn't too long at all. So Mass Effect 3 deals with characterization in a similar way to Mass Effect 1. A very close conversation, and as a result, harks back to what makes Mass Effect 1 so great. Emotional response. In a way, this was the ending. The way the characters develop themselves shows what happens to them, not necessarily ending slides or a voiceover before the credits. However, I can definitely understand people's frustrations with the lack of a specific ending per character. It's something that would definitely have been nice, but I'm willing to let it go, as it really did give them proper development considering 1 and 2. The story isn't necessarily the missions have priority stapled in front of them, but what you make it. The story is what you do, not just the main quest. Each character is part of it, and every event too. Through DLC such as Citadel, and side missions like shooting bottles, it develops those characters and provides satisfying ends to them. The other thing I loved about Mass Effect 3 was the humour, not because it was funny, though that too. It set the tone for the whole game. The last leg of this epic space opera. It wasn't funny for the player, but it was diegetic. This isn't a word often used to describe humour. In cinema, diegetic sound is what's playing from the film itself. It's the music from the radio, not the backing track added in post-production. The humour is from the characters to the other characters. It's not intended solely for the player, as a lot of humour is. It's a part of the game. These characters are intentionally cracking jokes for one another. And the moment you realise why is heartbreaking. They're going to die, or at least think they're going to die, and this made one of the most bittersweet atmospheres I've come across. And combined with every conversation I eavesdropped on about all the troubles people are having as a result of the Reaper War, demonstrates why I love Mass Effect 3. Mass Effect 3, through the resolution of Mass Effect 1 and the dystopia of Mass Effect 2, provides a combination of the two and creates one of the most striking feelings. It's the feeling of knowing everything's coming to an end and uncertainty, and yet there's that hope shining through the cracks. People are cracking jokes because they want to enjoy those last moments here with you. That's what made Mass Effect 3 amazing, on top of the characterization. Not the elegant third-person combat scenarios or the tremendous finales. It was every conversation in the Citadel and every bit of dialogue with the squad mates and every goodbye that I knew I had to savour. Because it did feel very much like a farewell. That was cathartic, but we're not done yet. I have a few things to talk about before drawing this to a close. Why did I put them in this order? I've talked about what made each one good and each one bad, but I haven't really said anything about the specific order. I loved all three games, and overall they each rank very highly on my hypothetical leaderboard. Mass Effect 1 was amazing in almost every respect, and while I felt for each of these characters, I didn't feel like I was affecting them in the same way I did in 2 and 3. I liked the characters and forming my own opinions on them, but I realised I didn't feel the same closeness to them as I did in Mass Effect 2 and 3. It may just be time spent all together, but I certainly felt closer to Thane in Mass Effect 2 alone than Kaidan in all of Mass Effect 1. Mass Effect 3 placed second because of its brilliant atmosphere. It was truly hilarious, and I'm very glad to see John Dombrow, who wrote Citadel and Garrus. He also wrote Overlord for Mass Effect 2. I'm very glad to see he's working on Mass Effect Andromeda. I love the way it tied the characters together, and it was all I could have asked for in terms of a resolution. I was incredibly engaged in terms of emotion, and to see everyone really hit their stride was a feeling like no other. I loved all of that game. Except the ending and auto dialogue. Yeesh. Oh, and Kai Frickin Lange. Moving on to Mass Effect 2, an experience like nothing else. Meeting characters and seeing them change depending on your choices was rewarding, to say the least. I liked how Mass Effect 2 struck the balance between a film and a game. This is something I mentioned it earlier, and it's something I'll talk more about in a moment. Mass Effect 2 worked as well as it did because of the stark contrast between itself and Mass Effect 1. That's what I loved about it. The change in atmosphere, pun completely intended, and the way the loyalty missions were handled was unparalleled. I liked a lot it did differently to Mass Effect 1, and arguably it's less Mass Effect as a result thereof. I liked how it made the player really matter more so than the other two, and how there's a sense of anxiety and imposition throughout the game. The tone of the game was absolutely brilliant, and the mechanics were inspired. That's pretty much it, but there's still more to say. Mass Effect, as a series, did something revolutionary. Games, nowadays, have some invisible obligation to be cinematic. And no, I don't mean the frame rate. I mean this. Games are trying to be films. Mass Effect from the beginning was intended to be like a film, and I think Mass Effect 2 struck the perfect balance between a game and a film, which is what I mentioned earlier. This is why I really, really like this game, and what made it so stand out to me. It was meant to evoke the same emotional response we have at a film, and it succeeds. The voice acting and soundtrack are second to none. The production quality is very much of the highest standard, and it feels like you're watching or playing something with the polish of Hollywood. Mass Effect manages to deliver the action sequences we all love in films, and original events like interrupts manage to add player agency into it too. It takes pride in the effort the actors go through, and lets shine the work put into it. The voice acting itself is something so deep that it's noticeably good, as is the music. It feels like a film, yet you know it's a game, and not just because of the shooting, but because you're given choices. Mass Effect is a beacon for the future of games themselves, that even non-idealists can look to. Cinematic doesn't mean linearity or smothering of player agency, and it doesn't mean low frame rates, and it doesn't mean that games are becoming films. But Mass Effect proves that game developers can embrace what makes a computer game unique without sacrificing making the kind of game that they want to. A game can interact with its players and take into account what they do, something films can't. And I think this is a sign of hope for what is to come into the future of gaming itself, influencing games like The Witcher as well. Mass Effect did something no other game really did to the same extent. A voice protagonist, a main plot, RPG and shooter elements, character-focused squad combat, development through dialogue, and a world as deep as the ocean. So when PC Gamer says all that happens is a few relationships are built, and groundwork is laid for later games, I can't help but think, if only you could see it as I do, James. It's so perfect.
There. Earth. I wish you could see it like I do. It's so